Have you ever noticed something strange happens when you just stop talking? No argument, no warning, no final speech. You simply walk away, quietly. No closure, no explanation, no fireworks. And yet, that silence, it echoes louder than any words you could have spoken. For the person who hurt you, that silence is deafening. It unsettles them, because silence removes the script. It denies them the drama they're used to. It cuts off the emotional supply that once kept them in control. They don't know what to do with your calm, because they expected chaos. But you gave them nothing. No reaction, no defense, no proof that they still mattered. And that's what rattles them. See, most people are prepared for confrontation. They know how to argue. They even expect it. They want it. Because as long as you're reacting, they're still relevant. But when you go silent, you remove the stage, and the show stops. There's no applause, no audience. Just the reality of their actions, and the space your absence creates. That space. That's where their mind starts spinning. Why aren't they responding? Are they really done? Do they not care anymore? And the truth is, yes, you do care, but not enough to stay in the war, because you've learned something most people never do. That silence is not weakness. It's wisdom. It's strength under control. It's dignity in action. It's a form of power that doesn't shout, but stings. And this is where Stoic philosophy becomes your compass. The Stoics taught that true strength lies not in overpowering others, but in mastering yourself, in choosing not to react when everything inside you screams for release. As Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." You don't need to out-argue someone who disrespected you. You don't need to prove your worth to someone who was too blind to see it. And you don't need to announce your exit to someone who never honored your presence. Walking away in silence is a declaration in itself. It says, "I've seen enough. I've felt enough. And now, I choose me." That's not cold. That's clarity. Let me ask you this. What does someone do when they no longer have emotional access to you? What happens when the person who used to cry, plead, or explain just doesn't? That's when the imbalance of power flips. Because your silence forces them to face something far more uncomfortable than your voice ever could. Themselves. They begin to question, to panic, to spin stories, to invent explanations. And none of it matters to you anymore, because you're not playing the game. And that's what truly breaks the cycle. Not confrontation, not retaliation, but disengagement. You're not cold, you're calm. You're not heartless, you're healed. You're not silent because you have nothing to say. You're silent because you no longer need to say it to them. That's what Stoic strength looks like in real life. It's walking away with your head high, not your heart heavy. It's reclaiming your emotional energy, rather than throwing it at people who never valued it. It's knowing that peace is more powerful than proof. And most importantly, it's understanding that not everyone deserves to know what's on your mind. Some people only earned your silence. So if you've been tempted to send that long text, if you've rehearsed that final speech 100 times in your head, if you've wondered whether they even care that you've pulled away, take a breath. And remember this: you don't owe anyone the privilege of your explanation, especially if they never honored the depth of your presence. Your silence is sacred. It's not empty. It's full of everything you no longer need to give. And if they're unsettled by it, good. Because sometimes the most powerful statement is to say nothing at all. Part 1. Why silence hurts more. Let's be honest. When someone wrongs you, your first instinct might be to confront them, to demand answers, to speak your truth. It's natural. You want them to know how much they hurt you. You want to say, "How could you?" You want them to feel what you felt, to finally understand. But here's the catch. Confrontation gives them a platform. And when you give them a platform, you give them a chance to deflect, to twist your words, to play victim, to shift the blame back onto you. They argue, they justify, they manipulate the facts to protect their ego. And before you know it, you're in a conversation that doesn't lead to healing. It leads to spinning. You leave the interaction more drained than you came in, because they didn't come to take responsibility. They came to win. But silence removes the arena altogether. No defense, no audience, no game. But instead, you don't. You unfollow. You stop texting. You quietly step away. No long message. No dramatic goodbye. Just absence. And days go by. Maybe weeks. They notice. They wonder why you've gone quiet. They expect a confrontation they can prepare for, something they can argue against or spin in their favor. But it never comes. And that is what gnaws at them. Because your silence removes the script. You don't play the hurt one. You don't ask for closure. You don't try to guilt them into accountability. You just exit the stage, calmly, completely, without applause. And in doing so, you shift the emotional power. Suddenly, they are the one searching for meaning. They are the one overthinking. They are the one haunted by the question, did they really walk away? Just like that? And yes, you did. Because that's the power of silence. It removes the oxygen from their fire. It forces them to sit in the ashes of what they burned and realize, maybe for the first time, that you're not coming back to explain why. And here's where Stoic philosophy steps in. The Stoics taught that we don't control others. We only control our response. And sometimes, the most powerful response is no response at all. As Epictetus said, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. In other words, you don't have to play the role they wrote for you. You can step off the stage at any time. Because real strength isn't in yelling the truth louder. Real strength is knowing when the truth no longer needs to be heard by them. It just needs to be honored by you. And yes, it takes discipline. It takes self-control. It takes choosing long-term peace over short-term satisfaction. Because silence doesn't always feel satisfying in the moment. You won't get that dramatic apology. You won't hear them say, "You were right." You may never know if they feel guilty or regret what they did. But here's what you will get: your dignity and peace and freedom. You get to walk away, knowing that you didn't waste another second trying to get clarity from someone who only ever brought you confusion. You get to reclaim your emotional energy, not because you bottled it up, but because you finally decided to stop handing it over. And if you've ever been through this, you already know. The moment you choose silence, not as a weapon, but as a boundary, something inside you shifts. You no longer feel the need to prove your worth to someone who failed to see it. You no longer feel tied to the outcome of a confrontation that never gave you closure anyway. Because you became the closure. You chose peace over power plays. You chose presence over pain. You chose to respond with stillness. And in doing so, you rose. So the next time someone expects a dramatic goodbye, a final explosion, or one last emotional plea, try silence instead. Not to punish, but to protect. Protect your growth. Protect your healing. Protect the version of you that refuses to pour into empty vessels. Because silence, it's not empty. It's full of everything they no longer get access to. And that is a lesson far louder than any words could ever teach. Part 2. Their initial reaction. And then it hits them. Not right away. Not in some dramatic scene, but in the quiet. The silence they weren't prepared for. Because you didn't play your usual part. You didn't fire back. You didn't defend yourself. You didn't even say goodbye. You just stopped responding. And for someone who thrives on control, that's terrifying. They expected a reaction. They counted on it. The accusations, the guilt trips, the subtle manipulations, they were all carefully placed to pull something out of you. Anger, sadness, confusion, anything to keep you emotionally engaged. But you gave them none of it. You ignored the message. You left the voicemail unanswered. You read the text and stayed quiet. And in that stillness, something unexpected begins to stir on their end. Shock. Because their playbook always worked before. The hot and cold behavior, the dramatic exits followed by fake apologies, the emotional baiting. It always kept people chasing, explaining, proving themselves. But not you, not this time. And it confuses them deeply. Because people like this, manipulators, emotional abusers, narcissists, they build their identity around the idea that they can make you feel something, that they still matter enough to disrupt your peace. But your indifference, it says otherwise. It tells them without a word, I'm no longer available for your chaos. And that shakes them. They may not show it at first. But behind the scenes, the confusion begins. Why aren't they reacting? Did they really just walk away? Are they talking to someone else? Are they trying to hurt me by ignoring me? They start over-analyzing every move you're not making. And what do they do in response? They escalate. It might start subtly. A follow-up message. Hey, did you see my last text? Then another. I'm just trying to understand what happened. Then something a little more loaded. Wow. So I guess you never cared. They're not reaching out because they've suddenly grown a conscience. They're reaching out because your silence is driving them into emotional, unfamiliar territory, a space where they don't have control. And to them, that's a threat. Because silence, to someone who relies on manipulation, is like turning off the spotlight. They can't perform without your attention. They can't control without your reaction. So they push harder. They send more texts. They drop subtle messages on social media. They reach out to mutual friends, trying to spark a response. But none of it lands, because you've disconnected emotionally. Not just physically, not just externally, internally. And that's where the power lies. Because when you reach a place where someone's words no longer enter your nervous system, where they can't touch your peace, your center, your breath, that's when they realize they've lost access. And Stoicism explains this with beautiful clarity. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Their confusion is a reflection of your control. They expected a fight, but instead, they met a wall of stillness. They expected tears, but instead, they found calm. They expected to see their power over you, but there was none left to see, and it rattles them. Because people who depend on chaos feel most threatened by peace. They don't understand your silence. They think it's cold. They may accuse you of being passive-aggressive. They'll project, twist, dramatize. Because the The truth that you no longer care, that you're no longer emotionally available, is something they're not emotionally equipped to process. It forces them to sit with the question, what if they're really done? What if they've really outgrown me? And more terrifying, what if I never had as much control as I thought I did? Now, let me be clear. Your goal isn't to hurt them. This isn't about playing games or reverse manipulation. This is about choosing stillness over chaos. It's about no longer allowing someone to pull you into a cycle that only drains you. It's about saying, without saying, my energy is mine now. And that's silence. It's not avoidance. It's alignment. You're not ignoring them to get revenge. You're choosing peace to reclaim your life. And if they don't understand that, good. Because this isn't for them to understand. It's for you to embody. And this moment right here, when their manipulation fails, when their tactics fall flat, when their games go unanswered, this is where you rise. Not loudly, not defiantly, but unshakably. Because your silence is no longer the absence of a voice. It's the presence of a boundary. And in a world that thrives on noise, drama, and reaction, that boundary is revolutionary. So the next time you're tempted to respond, to explain, to defend, pause, breathe, and remember, they're not confused because you're being cruel. They're confused because they can no longer reach the parts of you they once had access to. And that's your healing in action. Part 3. The spiral of self-doubt. At first, they act like your silence doesn't bother them. They pretend to be unbothered, maybe even smug. They post more, laugh louder, carry on as if nothing's changed. But that's just the surface. Because underneath, a storm is starting. Your silence has done something that all their manipulation, all their drama, all their calculated games couldn't prepare them for. It forced them to face themselves. And for someone who spent a lifetime avoiding their own reflection, that's a terrifying place to be. You see, when you remove your attention, when you stop chasing, stop reacting, stop feeding the loop, they lose their favorite distraction, you. They can no longer shift the focus to your flaws, your tone, your mistakes. Now, all they have left is their own thoughts. And those thoughts, they aren't kind. Because people like this, those who manipulate, who gaslight, who emotionally twist others to maintain control, they're rarely at peace inside. Their confidence is a costume. Their ego is a shield. Their arrogance, just armor for a very fragile identity. And when your silence enters the room, it strips that armor away. It whispers, you're not in control anymore. You can't deflect this. They're gone, and you don't know why. And that's when it begins. The spiral of self-doubt. They start overthinking every moment, every word, every decision that led to this silence. Did I go too far? Was that message too cold? Why aren't they reacting? Did they replace me? They refresh your social media obsessively, searching for signs, for answers. They watch your stories. They scan your comments. They overanalyze your silence. Because they're looking for evidence that they still matter. But you've made no announcement. You've declared nothing. And that uncertainty, it drives them deeper into the spiral. Because confrontation would have given them closure, even if it was messy. But this calm withdrawal, it leaves them suspended in a space with no answers, just questions. And here's where it gets even more real. They may not tell you this. They may never admit it. But deep down, a flicker of regret begins to form. Not always because they suddenly realize how deeply they hurt you, but because they realize they lost control over someone who once gave them access. You used to explain, you used to care, you used to overextend yourself trying to understand their chaos. And now, you don't. And that shift creates a void they don't know how to sit with. Stoic wisdom reminds us, it is not the things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. Epictetus. And in this moment, their opinion of themselves begins to unravel. Because without your forgiveness, without your emotional availability, without your validation, they're left with the truth they've been avoiding. Maybe they were the problem. But instead of facing that truth with humility, many spiral even deeper. Some become paranoid. They assume you're doing better without them, that you've moved on, that you've won, and it burns them because they were never prepared to lose you. Others flip between regret and rage. One day, they miss you. The next, they're angry you didn't beg to stay. That's what happens when people try to avoid accountability with control and fail. But here's what's important for you to understand. Their spiral is not your responsibility. Your silence didn't break them. It simply exposed what was already broken. And I know what you might be thinking. If they're spiraling, does that mean they finally care? Maybe, maybe not. But even if they do, so what? Caring isn't the same as changing. Regret isn't the same as growth. And confusion is not accountability. They may stalk your life from a distance, but that doesn't mean they've grown into someone safe. In fact, sometimes, their obsession only reveals how deep their need for control truly goes. Because if they really cared, they wouldn't be spiraling in silence. They'd be reflecting. They'd be healing. They'd be doing the work you've already begun. And here's where you rise above. You don't need to check whether they're watching. You don't need to decode their passive posts. You don't need to know if they finally feel the loss. You've already won the moment you stop needing their response to validate your decision. Because true detachment doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you no longer let what they feel or don't feel decide your direction. So let them spiral. Let them question. Let them sit in the very silence they never expected from you. You don't need to step in. You don't need to explain. You don't need to rescue someone from a pit they keep digging for themselves. That's not indifference. That's self-respect. You're not cold. You're clear. You're not avoiding. You're evolving. You're not punishing them. You're protecting your peace. And as they spiral, wondering what went wrong, trying to find the old version of you that used to chase, explain, fix, let them wonder. Because the answer they're searching for isn't out there anymore. It walked away with grace, with strength, with silence. Part 4. Loss of power. There's a moment, subtle, quiet, almost unspoken, when it hits them. They no longer have power over you, and they feel it. Not because you made a scene, not because you yelled, cried, or tried to get even, but because this time, you didn't do anything at all. You just stopped reacting. That's when the power dynamic flips. See, for people who thrive on control, whether it's a manipulative partner, a toxic friend, or a passive-aggressive coworker, your reactions are their fuel. They don't need your love. They need your response. Anger, frustration, fear, anxiety, even silence that's still emotionally loaded. As long as you're emotionally invested, they still feel in control. But once you disconnect, not just physically but emotionally, the power cord gets yanked from the wall. And suddenly, they're left standing there, powerless. Let's take a common example. Imagine a workplace bully. Maybe it's a manager who constantly undermines you, or a colleague who subtly belittles you in front of others. You used to get upset. You'd go home fuming, questioning your value, rehearsing what you wish you'd said. But one day, you stop giving them access to your peace. You still show up. You still do your job. But you're no longer playing their game. You don't flinch at their sarcasm. You don't try to win them over. You don't even blink when they try to provoke you. You remain calm, steady, neutral, and they notice. Because suddenly, they're no longer the center of your emotional weather. And that's when they start to unravel. Not loudly, but internally. Because without your emotional response, they lose their influence. And this doesn't just apply to work. It applies to relationships, families, even social media. Anyone who once felt powerful because they could push your buttons will feel deeply unsettled when those buttons stop working. Why? Because for the first time, they realize the power they had over you was borrowed, and now you've taken it back. This is where Stoic wisdom shines. The ancient Stoics understood something that modern psychology continues to confirm. No one can truly control you unless you allow them to control your reactions. Epictetus said it best. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. That reaction, that inner world, is yours, not theirs. So when you stop reacting to their passive aggression, when you no longer justify your choices to someone who never respected them, when you choose calm over chaos, stillness over struggle, you shift the power dynamic without saying a single word. And they feel it. But here's the paradox. It doesn't feel satisfying to them. It feels threatening. Because they built their control on the illusion that they could shake you, that they could mold your emotions, change your mood, dictate your day. And now, they're left with nothing but their own unresolved chaos, and a version of you they no longer recognize. A version of you that doesn't flinch, doesn't chase, doesn't need them, and in their mind, that feels like defeat. Let me ask you something. Who really holds the power? The one who yells, provokes, manipulates? Or the one who remains centered, composed, and untouched by provocation? We've been conditioned to associate strength with loudness, with fighting back, proving our worth, or standing up in obvious ways. But real strength is quiet. It's the woman who smiles and walks away instead of arguing. It's the man who sets a boundary without explaining it twice. It's the person who chooses peace even when revenge would be easier. Because true power isn't loud. It doesn't need validation. It lives in self-mastery. And self-mastery is terrifying to people who depend on emotional chaos to feel relevant. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you're cold or distant. They'll try to provoke you again, just to see if they can still get a rise out of you. But they can't, because you've stopped living in their emotional orbit. And that is your breakthrough. You no longer need to be understood by someone who distorted every conversation. You no longer need to be liked by someone who only liked you when you were compliant. You no longer need to fight to be seen by someone who was never looking with love in the first place. You've stepped outside the dynamic entirely. And that's the loss they can't recover from. Not because they lost you, but because they lost the version of you who gave them power. And here's the part that might surprise you. You don't need to be angry about it. You don't need to be bitter. Because once you reclaim your emotional autonomy, their behavior becomes irrelevant. They can spiral. They can act out. They can smear, sulk, or sabotage. But you stay grounded. Because the moment they lost the ability to influence your inner world is the moment they lost control. And from that point on, their power is gone. Not because you fought harder, but because you chose not to fight at all. That, my friend, is Stoic power. Not explosive, not dramatic, just quiet, calm, and completely immovable. Part 5. Your silent growth. Let's talk about what happens to you during the silence. Because while they're confused, spiraling, grasping for control, something beautiful begins to take root on your side of the silence. It's subtle at first. You breathe a little deeper. You sleep a little easier. You start hearing your own thoughts again, without their voice echoing in your head. And for the first time in a long time, you're not walking on emotional eggshells. You're free. Not completely healed, not yet, but finally able to start. That's the secret no one talks about. Silence isn't just about shutting someone out. It's about letting yourself in. It's not a punishment. It's a path back to yourself. Because when the noise fades, when you stop checking your phone, when you stop explaining, when you stop waiting for a reply that never comes, your mind opens up. And in that space, healing begins. You start noticing the weight you were carrying wasn't even yours. You realize how much time and energy you poured into trying to fix someone who didn't want to grow. And now, you redirect that energy into yourself, into your peace, into your growth. Maybe you finally sign up for that course you've been putting off. Maybe you return to the gym, the journal, the morning walks. Maybe you reconnect with friends who make you feel seen, not small. Or maybe you just sit in silence, and for the first time in a long while, it doesn't feel lonely. It feels like home. That's what silent growth looks like. It's not loud. It doesn't demand applause. But it's steady. And it's powerful. Because while they're stuck trying to figure out why you're no longer playing their game, you're building a new life that no longer includes the need to explain why you left. You become stronger, quietly. You become clearer, quietly. You begin to glow from the inside out. And suddenly, they notice. Maybe they pop back in with a casual, "Hey, just thinking of you." Or maybe they try to bait you again, just to test your calm. But it's too late, because you've changed. Not in a bitter way, not in a "look what you missed" way, but in a way that says, "I no longer need to shrink to be accepted. I no longer give my peace away just to keep the connection alive. I'm not angry. I've simply evolved." And that evolution, that's what they never saw coming. Because while they were obsessed with power, control, and attention, you chose growth. And Stoic philosophy reminds us, this is the highest form of strength. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." You stopped arguing. You stopped defending. You just became. You became better, calmer, healthier, wiser, and no one had to witness it for it to matter. That's what silent growth does. It roots deep beneath the surface, like a tree before it breaks through the soil. Invisible at first, but unstoppable once it starts rising. And when you return, when people finally see the change in you, it's not about revenge. It's not about them at all. It's about you. Because the best revenge isn't success. It's peace. It's waking up one day and realizing you're no longer haunted, no longer triggered, no longer running a dialogue in your head that includes them. They stayed stuck in the same pattern. You stepped into a new rhythm. And that's why growth in silence is so powerful. Because it's not for show. It's for soul. And it reminds you that you don't have to announce your evolution. You just have to live it. So if you're in that quiet phase right now, if you're healing behind the scenes, choosing solitude over superficial connections, rebuilding your habits and relearning your worth, stay there. Stay in the silence. Let it do its work. Because soon enough, the world will feel the shift in your energy. Not because you shouted, but because you no longer need to. Part 6. Their long-term regret. At first, they brush it off. They act like your silence is temporary, like you're just being dramatic, like you'll eventually come back. They tell themselves you'll respond eventually, that you're just trying to make a point. But time passes, and nothing changes. You don't reach out. You don't look back. And they start to realize, slowly, painfully, that this time, it's different. This time, you're not playing the game. You're gone. For real. And that realization doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in, quietly, over days, months, sometimes even years. At first, they check in from a distance. They stalk your profile. They ask mutual friends about you. They watch your stories, looking for signs of struggle, hoping, in some small way, that you're not as okay as you seem. But then something happens that truly rattles them. You begin to thrive, not with loud announcements, not to prove a point, but in your own quiet, grounded way. You rise, you grow, you evolve, you glow. And they see it. They hear about your new job, your business, your happiness. They see that you're laughing again, living fully, loving more deeply. And they realize, maybe for the first time, that they were never the reason you stayed strong. They were the reason you were held back. And here's where the regret begins to take root. Not just because they lost you, but because they now know they'll never get access to this version of you. The version you became once they were no longer part of your world. The version that's healed, that's whole, that's wiser, softer, sharper, all at once. And that realization stings in a way that no argument, no rejection, no slammed door ever could. Because they begin to see what they couldn't see when they had you. That your love was rare, that your loyalty was unmatched, that your presence was a privilege, and not something they were entitled to. But now, that chapter is closed. And here's what they feel, though they'll rarely say it out loud. Loss. Deep, gnawing loss. Because while you were healing in silence, they stayed stuck in their patterns. While you were rebuilding your life, they were recycling their habits. And while you grew stronger by walking away, they only now understand what they let slip away. It's not revenge. It's not bitterness. It's just truth. And it hits harder the longer it takes to arrive. And here's the most powerful part of it all. You didn't have to do anything to create that regret. You didn't beg for closure. You didn't plot a comeback. You didn't try to prove your worth. You just focused on becoming who you were meant to be, without their voice in your head. And that's why their regret cuts so deep, because there's no way back. They may reach out years later. Send a, "Hey, just wanted to check in," or "I've been thinking about you" message. But it's not about you. It's about them, their unfinished feelings, their nostalgia, their grief. But you've outgrown the need to explain your silence. You've outgrown the need to reopen a door you finally had the strength to close. Because you now know, just because someone regrets losing you, doesn't mean they're ready to deserve you. Their regret is theirs to carry, not yours to fix. And this is where Stoic philosophy offers us deep peace. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." You don't need to look back to feel whole. You don't need to check if they've changed to feel complete. You are living your life now, fully, authentically, quietly powerful. And if they regret losing the old you, they'd never survive the presence of who you are today, because the person you've become isn't interested in being chased. They're interested in choosing peace, choosing purpose, choosing people who don't need to lose you to value you. So when that message comes years down the line, when someone from your past suddenly remembers what they once took for granted, you won't feel the need to respond out of guilt or nostalgia. You'll smile, maybe even send them light, but you'll keep walking. Not because you hate them, but because you've grown too much to return to a version of yourself that tolerated less than you deserved. That's not revenge. That's wisdom. That's grace. That's the quiet reward of healing. So let them regret. Let them feel the weight of what they lost. You just keep building the life that made them realize your silence was never absence. It was evolution. So here we are. After everything. After the silence, the confusion, the spiral, the loss of control, your quiet growth, and their lingering regret. There's one truth left standing. You never needed to fight to win. You just needed to stop playing the game. Because in the end, silent withdrawal hit harder than any words you could have said. It didn't require yelling, arguments, or dramatic exits. It didn't need public closure, final speeches, or a list of all the ways they hurt you. It only required one thing, that you chose peace. And that choice, it changed everything. It protected your energy. It accelerated your growth. And most importantly, it left them with the one thing they didn't know how to handle: your absence. You didn't just walk away from them. You walked toward yourself. And that's why your silence hit so deeply. Not because it was cold, but because it was clear. Clear that you were done explaining. Clear that you were no longer available for manipulation. Clear that your boundaries were no longer up for negotiation. And while they may never admit it, that clarity shook them more than confrontation ever could. Because people can argue with your words. They can twist them, mock them, use them against you. But they can't argue with your silence. There's no script to flip, no defense to mount, no drama to distract from the truth. And the truth is simple. You outgrew the pain. You stopped chasing closure. You stopped needing them to understand what they never tried to hear. And in doing so, you stepped fully into something rare: inner sovereignty. That's the Stoic way. You didn't seek revenge. You didn't demand validation. You simply reclaimed your power and let your peace speak louder than your pain. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." You didn't mirror their chaos. You didn't stoop to their level. You became untouchable, not through anger, but through emotional discipline. And in a world obsessed with noise, with arguments, with attention and reaction, peace becomes the loudest rebellion. It's the thing they never expected, because they were ready for war. But you gave them stillness. They were expecting you to break down, but you broke away. They thought silence meant defeat, but it was your victory. Because when you walk away quietly, without a trace of emotional chaos, what you're really saying is, "I don't need to prove anything to you anymore. I'm free." And that's a message that echoes, not just in their mind, but in the life you begin to build without them. A life where you rise, not to spite them, but to honor yourself. A life where your energy goes toward healing, not explaining. A life where the version of you who used to tolerate mistreatment no longer exists. And now, here's the truth you carry forward. Your silence didn't make you weak. It made you wise. It didn't make you passive. It made you powerful. Because emotional strength isn't shown in how loudly you speak your pain. It's shown in how calmly you choose to protect your peace. So let them wonder. Let them spin stories. Let them regret. You don't need to respond. You don't need to defend. You don't need to reopen what you worked so hard to walk away from. The silence is enough. And in that silence lives your final word, your legacy, your stoic statement. I am not yours to provoke. Not anymore. So if you've been holding on to words you wish you could say, if you've been tempted to go back and make them understand, if you've ever questioned whether silence was enough, let this be your reminder. You already said everything when you chose to say nothing. And that silence, that was never absence. It was strength. It was power. It was peace. And peace, unshaken, unwavering, unapologetic peace, is the greatest statement you'll ever make. If this message spoke to something deep inside you, if you felt the quiet power of walking away, if you're learning to protect your peace and grow in silence, then don't walk this journey alone. Subscribe now and join a community built on strength, clarity, and calm. A place where we don't chase noise, we build resilience. Every week, we dive deeper into Stoic wisdom, emotional mastery, and the quiet truths that change lives. Tap that subscribe button. Leave a comment and share your thoughts. Your story might help someone else find their peace too. And if this resonated with you, give it a like. It tells the algorithm this kind of healing content matters. Remember, your silence is not emptiness. It's a statement. And the world is finally listening.